The morning sun filtered weakly through the blinds of the Carters' apartment on the outskirts of Chicago. The kitchen smelled of fresh coffee and eggs, that kind of comforting scent that usually meant stability. Maya Carter stood by the stove, carefully placing a plate on the table as her husband Ryan slid into his chair with the relaxed ease of a man who believed the world revolved around him. He picked up his fork, tried a bite of the omelet, and smiled warmly. "You really do make the best breakfast, Maya. I don't know how you do it, but it tastes perfect every time." His voice carried that familiar gentleness, the same tone that once made her heart flutter. This morning, though, it only felt like background noise in a routine that had started to feel too predictable. Maya forced a small smile, sitting opposite him. "I'm glad you like it," she murmured, adjusting her coffee mug. Ryan leaned back, sipping his drink, his eyes flicking to the neatly packed bag resting by the door. "Hey, before I forget, could you pull out my gray suit later? I'll need it for the trip. We've got that week-long seminar up in Milwaukee. It'll save me some stress if it's ready to go." The request was ordinary, the kind a husband might casually make of a wife who knew his schedule better than he did. And yet there was a strange detachment in his tone, as if the request was just a prelude to something heavier. Maya nodded without thinking, the rhythm of their life so ingrained she didn't even question it. For a moment, everything felt deceptively normal. The clinking of silverware, the muted hum of a car outside, the faint buzz of Ryan's phone on the counter. But then he set his fork down, wiped his mouth with deliberate calm, and looked at her with eyes that seemed rehearsed for this moment. "Maya," he began softly, almost tenderly, "there's something I need to tell you, and I owe you honesty because you don't deserve half-truths." Her stomach tightened. She gave a faint laugh, uneasy. "That sounds serious. What's going on?" He inhaled deeply, leaning his elbows on the table as though he were about to deliver a business presentation. "Her name is Madison. I'm in love with her and she's pregnant." The words fell into the quiet kitchen like shards of glass. For a second Maya thought she misheard him. The air seemed to drain from the room, and the sound of her own pulse thundered in her ears. Ryan kept talking, his voice calm, almost soothing. "I know this is a shock, but listen, Maya, this isn't about you doing anything wrong. It's just that love doesn't always last forever. We had a good run, but feelings fade, and I can't ignore that anymore." Her hands trembled around the coffee mug. Just last night, he had kissed her forehead, thanked her for folding his shirts, told her he loved her. Now he sat across from her, dismantling their marriage with the same tone he used when explaining a work project. Ryan continued, undisturbed by her silence. "You see, Madison's expecting, and I believe a child deserves a complete family. I can't walk away from that responsibility. It wouldn't be right. I want to be there to give this baby the life it deserves." The gentleness of his words only made them more cruel. He even reached across the table, brushing his fingers against her hand as though he were offering comfort. "I truly wish the best for you, Maya. I hope we can stay friends. Hostility only poisons the soul, and I don't want that for either of us." Maya stared at him, her lips parting, but no words came out. She felt as though the world had tilted off its axis. Ryan took her silence as acceptance. "I know this is hard and you'll go through stages. Anger, bargaining, sadness, but eventually you'll come to terms with it. That's just how people process change. Why drag it out with bitterness?" He smiled faintly as if he were guiding her through some self-help seminar. She could barely breathe. The man in front of her, her husband, the man she'd shared 7 years of her life with, was speaking to her like a therapist rehearsing lines from a book. Finally he leaned back, his tone turning practical. "I'll be gone for the week. When I get back I'll need you to have your things packed. 1 week should be plenty of time. The apartment isn't big enough for all 3 of us once Madison moves in with the baby. I trust you'll understand." He stood, rinsed his plate in the sink, and checked his buzzing phone. The corners of his mouth lifted as he read a message, a glow on his face that hadn't been there when he spoke to his wife. Maya sat frozen, the coffee cooling in her cup, her world collapsing around her. Her chest tightened, but her body refused to move. She could only watch as Ryan slung his bag over his shoulder, kissed the top of her head with chilling casualness, and walked toward the door. Her lips parted once more, but nothing came out. She was too stunned to plead, too broken to protest. The silence in the apartment roared louder than any scream she could have made. The apartment had never felt so alien. Only an hour earlier, it had been the place where Maya believed her marriage still lived. The walls infused with years of effort, laughter, and carefully chosen details that made it theirs. Now, as she stood in the living room with the morning light cutting sharp angles across the floor, it felt stripped of belonging. The air smelled faintly of furniture polish and detergent, scents she once associated with pride. Today they made her stomach twist. Her gaze traveled across the space, over the polished hardwood floor she had insisted they refinish, the beige curtain she picked out after weeks of scrolling through catalogs, the sleek dining table she saved up for by freelancing late at night. Each piece was a reminder of her devotion, her commitment to making this apartment a true home, and now every item seemed to mock her. All of it would remain here, not for her, but for Madison. Madison with her smooth hair and glowing skin. Madison with the unborn child Ryan had chosen over his marriage. The humiliation was suffocating. It wasn't just betrayal. It was displacement. The reality of another woman sitting on her sofa, cooking in her kitchen, sleeping in her bed was unbearable. Maya pressed her hands against her face, willing the image away, but it only grew sharper. She saw Madison unpacking baby clothes in the nursery Maya had once dreamed of. Ryan standing proudly beside her as though the past 7 years never existed. The rage flared suddenly wild and raw. She looked at the tall bookcase against the wall, stacked with novels and photo albums, and for a brief, reckless moment imagined herself tearing it down, ripping pages, scattering photographs until the floor was littered with fragments of a life that no longer mattered. She thought about grabbing a saw, cutting the dining table straight down the middle, leaving Ryan and Madison with jagged halves instead of the polished piece she had chosen. She pictured smashing plates, hurling them against the walls until nothing remained but shards. Her breath quickened as the fantasies swirled. The desire to destroy was intoxicating in its intensity, a desperate way to reclaim control when everything had been ripped from her hands. But the storm inside her met a wall of exhaustion. She sank onto the sofa, gripping its armrest, forcing herself to breathe. No matter how satisfying it might feel in the moment, she knew the chaos would only wound her further. It would brand her as irrational, give Ryan the narrative he seemed almost prepared for, that she was too unstable to handle the truth. Closing her eyes, she whispered to herself, "Don't give him that." When she opened them again, the apartment still mocked her, every object echoing betrayal, but her fury had dulled into a hollow ache. She stood, slipping her shoes on with clumsy fingers, and walked out the door. The walls closed in too tightly here. She needed space to breathe before she suffocated. Outside, the late morning air carried the hum of the city. Cars passed along the street. Neighbors carried grocery bags. A child's laughter drifted from somewhere down the block. It was ordinary life moving forward as though her world hadn't just imploded. Maya walked toward the park 2 streets over, each step heavy, her body sluggish with disbelief. The park had always been her place of escape. A modest stretch of green surrounded by apartment buildings with a playground on one end and a small pond on the other. Today it felt like a sanctuary. She lowered herself onto a bench beneath a maple tree, the shade cool against her burning skin. Her hands trembled as she clasped them together, her knuckles pale. She focused on the simple movements around her. A woman jogging with earbuds in, a man tossing a ball for his dog, toddlers stumbling across the grass as their mothers trailed behind. Normality. Stability. She envied them with an ache so deep it felt physical. For the first time, she wondered if she had been blind, if signs of Ryan's betrayal had been there all along, and she had simply chosen not to see. Her chest rose and fell unevenly as she tried to calm herself. "Don't fall apart here," she thought. Her voice in her head was stern, maternal, almost as though scolding herself into composure. The fury lingered, the temptation to destroy still pulsed. But here in the park, the clean air and the steady rhythm of life pressed against her panic. She inhaled deeply, then again, each breath an anchor. The reality had not changed. In a week, she would no longer live in that apartment. Madison would take her place beside Ryan, and the life Maya built with such care would belong to someone else. But for now, in this small pocket of green among the city's concrete, she clung to the fragile act of breathing, of holding herself together. It wasn't strength, not yet. It was survival. By the time Maya returned to the apartment complex, the sun had shifted high above the buildings, its light too bright against her tired eyes. She climbed the narrow stairwell to her floor, her steps dragging, her body hollow with exhaustion. Every corner of the hallway seemed to press in on her, whispering reminders of what she had lost. When she reached her door, she paused, unable to push herself inside. The thought of sitting in those rooms again, rooms that already belonged to someone else in Ryan's mind, was unbearable. It was then she heard a door creak open across the hall. Mrs. Eleanor Brooks, her elderly neighbor, stepped into the corridor. She carried a small basket of folded laundry against her hip, her movements slow but steady. Eleanor was in her 70s with white hair pinned neatly at the back and eyes that still held a sharpness despite their age. She noticed Maya leaning heavily against the doorframe. "Honey," Eleanor said softly, setting the basket down on a chair near her doorway. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Are you all right?" Maya swallowed hard, forcing a thin smile. "I'm fine," she murmured, but her voice cracked under the weight of the lie. Eleanor studied her for a long moment, her expression both patient and unyielding. "You don't look fine. Why don't you come in for a bit? I've got some tea on the stove." Maya hesitated, but the thought of returning to her apartment alone was suffocating. She nodded faintly and followed Eleanor inside. The older woman's apartment was small but warm, filled with bookshelves, crocheted blankets, and framed photographs that lined the walls. It smelled faintly of chamomile and lavender. Eleanor motioned to the sofa and poured 2 cups of tea, setting one in front of Maya before settling across from her. For a moment neither spoke. Maya wrapped her hands around the warm mug, staring into the steam, trying to gather the courage to say the words out loud. Finally she whispered, "Ryan, he told me this morning that he's in love with someone else. She's pregnant. He wants me gone in a week." Her voice trembled on the last sentence, and Eleanor's eyes softened. The older woman reached across the coffee table, resting a wrinkled hand over Maya's. "Oh, child," she murmured. "I'm so sorry. No one deserves that kind of betrayal." Tears threatened to spill, but Maya blinked them back. "I keep thinking I should have seen it coming. That maybe I missed something obvious, but he was just normal, even kind until he wasn't." Eleanor nodded slowly, her thumb brushing over Maya's hand in a soothing rhythm. "That's how it always is. They keep their faces straight until they've got somewhere else to run." She drew a long breath, her gaze drifting toward the window. "You know, I once thought forgiveness was the answer. I thought holding a marriage together was worth swallowing the hurt. I was wrong." Maya looked at her, surprised. Eleanor rarely spoke about her past. "My husband," Eleanor continued, her voice low but steady, "had an affair when I was about your age. Came to me with his apologies, told me it was just a mistake. I believed him. I even raised the son he had with her. That boy grew up under my roof while I tucked away my own bitterness, convinced myself I was being noble. And where did it get me? 20 years of loneliness in my own marriage, pretending everything was fine while he slipped out at night to see her again. He left anyway in the end." The bitterness in her voice was sharp, but beneath it was something even heavier. Regret that time had never softened. "I wasted half my life giving second chances that never meant a thing," Eleanor said, her eyes glistening though no tears fell. She leaned closer, her grip on Maya's hand tightening with sudden intensity. "Don't you ever go back to him. Don't you ever let him convince you it was just a mistake. A man who betrays once will do it again. He will drain you of your youth, your peace, your hope, and you'll wake up one day realizing you gave away pieces of yourself for nothing." Maya's throat ached. The words cut deep, echoing her own fears. But they also carried a strange strength. Eleanor wasn't offering pity. She was offering truth carved from her own pain. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," Maya admitted, her voice barely audible. "You are," Eleanor said firmly. "I see it in you right now. You feel broken, but broken glass can still shine. You will get through this, child. Just don't tie yourself back to the man who shattered you." The room was quiet again, except for the ticking of a clock on the wall. Maya stared into her tea, the weight in her chest still crushing, but beneath it, something stirred, a seed of defiance, of resolve. She didn't thank Eleanor right away. Words seemed too small for the gravity of what had been shared. But as she left the older woman's apartment, she felt different. The pain remained raw and throbbing. Yet it no longer left her powerless. Eleanor's story had carved a path before her, a warning of what her life could become if she let Ryan back in. And though Maya still felt fragile, she carried that warning like armor. The next morning, Maya lingered in the hallway, the metal keys cold in her hand. She had barely slept, her body restless, her mind circling Ryan's words until they blurred into noise. She tried to believe it was just a nightmare, that the world she had built hadn't been dismantled with a single conversation. But when she opened the mailbox, reality waited. Inside was a large envelope, heavier than usual bills or advertisements. Her fingers trembled as she slid it out and broke the seal. The official letterhead of the Cook County Circuit Court glared back at her. She scanned the first lines, her vision swimming, until the words became painfully clear. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Her knees nearly gave way. She gripped the edge of the mailbox, pulling in a shaky breath. Ryan hadn't been bluffing, hadn't spoken in anger. He had already filed. The choice had been made before he even confessed. She staggered back into the stairwell, the papers clutched tightly in her hands. Each page was covered in legal language, sterile and impersonal, but the meaning was simple. The life she had known was officially over. In the quiet of her apartment, she laid the documents on the dining table, the same table she had imagined splitting in half just days before. The words blurred through her tears. Terms of property, notice to vacate, his lawyer's signature. It was all so methodical, so cold. Maya pressed her palms into her eyes. The humiliation was complete. Ryan hadn't even allowed her the dignity of conversation or compromise. He had gone to the courthouse behind her back, reduced her marriage to paperwork, and sealed it with an attorney's stamp. Something inside her hardened. The fantasies of smashing dishes or sawing tables suddenly seemed childish compared to the weight of what she now held. There was nothing left to salvage. The only option was to walk away before she drowned completely. With shaking hands, she picked up her phone and dialed her mother's number. Grace Carter answered on the second ring, her warm voice breaking through the static. "Maya, sweetheart, are you all right?" For a moment Maya couldn't speak. Her throat constricted, words lodging like stones. Then in a rush everything spilled out. The confession, the pregnancy, the papers now spread across her table. There was silence on the other end, followed by her mother's sharp inhale. "Oh honey, I'm coming right now. Stay put." But Maya shook her head even though her mother couldn't see. "No, Mom. I don't want to stay here another minute. Can I come home?" "You don't have to ask," Grace said firmly. "This house will always be yours. Alex will bring the truck. We'll help you pack. You're not facing this alone." Maya's breath hitched as relief mingled with despair. For the first time since Ryan's confession, she felt the faintest glimmer of safety. Within an hour the doorbell rang. Alex stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, his expression tight with anger. "Let's get your stuff," he said simply. No questions, no judgment. Behind him, his wife, Emma, offered a gentle smile, her arms already opening for a hug. Their young son, Ethan, peeked out from behind her legs, clutching a toy truck, his innocent eyes wide. Maya knelt to scoop Ethan into her arms, pressing her face against his soft hair. The child giggled, oblivious to the storm raging in the adult's world, and for a fleeting moment her chest loosened. The family moved quickly, their unity wrapping around her like armor. Grace arrived with boxes and tape, her voice brisk but tender. "Take what's yours, Maya. Don't leave behind what you worked for. We'll sort the rest later." They worked in silence at first, the sound of packing tape tearing through the air, drawers sliding open, the dull thud of shoes dropped into boxes. Each item carried a weight: dresses she had worn to anniversaries, framed photos from trips, the books she read during sleepless nights. One by one they were tucked away, stripped of the meaning they once held inside this apartment. At times Maya's hands froze mid-motion, overcome by memories. She would stand still, staring at a sweater Ryan once bought her, or the lamp they had picked together, and grief threatened to undo her. But then, Alex would quietly lift the item from her hands, place it in a box and move on. The gesture was small but steadying, a reminder that she wasn't trapped alone in this unraveling. By late afternoon the apartment looked barren. The shelves were empty, the closets gutted, the walls bare. What had once been a home now resembled a shell, cold and unfamiliar. Maya took one last look around, her chest tight. She realized she felt no need to say goodbye. The apartment, once her sanctuary, had already been claimed by someone else in Ryan's mind. Let him have it. Let him build his new life here with Madison. She no longer wanted it. When they carried the final box down to the truck, Grace wrapped an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "You're stronger than you think, Maya," she said softly. "And you're not starting from nothing. You're starting from family. That makes all the difference." Maya swallowed hard, blinking against the sting in her eyes. For the first time in days, she let herself believe her mother might be right. The afternoon sun slanted through the half-empty windows of the apartment, casting long, hollow shadows across the floor. Boxes were stacked in uneven rows, taped and labeled, waiting to be carried down to Alex's truck. The steady rhythm of packing had given the Carter family a kind of momentum. Each taped box, each cleared shelf, was another step away from Ryan and the life Maya no longer wanted. Grace folded linens into a carton, her lips pressed tight. Alex hauled another load toward the door while Emma kept Ethan occupied with coloring books on the bare rug. For the first time in days, Maya felt a sense of progress. She was reclaiming control one cardboard box at a time. Then came the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway, followed by the unmistakable click of a key turning in the lock. The door swung open and there she was, Ryan's mother. Elaine Carter's frame filled the doorway, her posture rigid, her face set in a scowl that seemed carved in stone. She stepped inside without invitation, her sharp eyes sweeping across the room, taking in the sight of stripped walls and stacked boxes, her lips curled in disdain. "What in God's name is going on here?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the room like glass. Maya froze mid-step, a stack of books in her arms. Grace immediately moved to her daughter's side, her expression hardening. Alex straightened, his broad shoulders tensing like a shield. Elaine didn't wait for an answer. She jabbed a finger toward the boxes. "This is theft. You think you can get this apartment and walk away with whatever you please? If you don't stop this right now, I'll call the police." Her words echoed, poisonous and loud. Ethan whimpered at the raised voices, and Emma pulled him close, whispering reassurance. Maya's chest tightened. But before she could speak, Alex stepped forward. "Mrs. Carter, you need to calm down," he said firmly. "Maya's taking her belongings, clothes, books, personal items. She's entitled to them. You have no authority to stop her." Elaine's glare shifted to him, her face flushed with fury. "Stay out of this. This is between my son and his wife. And as long as Ryan's name is on that lease, this apartment and everything in it belongs to him." Alex's voice deepened, steady but sharp. "That's not how the law works, and you know it. If you truly believe something doesn't belong to Maya, you can bring it up in court. But storming in here and threatening her isn't just wrong. It's harassment." Grace added, her tone sharp as steel. "We're not thieves. My daughter has every right to take what's hers. You will not intimidate her in her own home." Elaine let out a harsh laugh, shaking her head. Her home? This was never her home. Ryan paid the rent. Ryan built this life. And she should be grateful she had it as long as she did. Now she's stripping it bare out of spite. Maya set the books down slowly, her hands trembling, but she forced herself to stand tall. She looked directly at Elaine, her voice clear, though her heart pounded. "I am not taking what isn't mine. Every box here holds things I bought, things I wore, things I worked for. I don't want Ryan's things. I don't want a single reminder of him. But I will not walk away empty-handed as if I never existed here." The conviction in her tone silenced the room for a beat. Elaine's eyes narrowed, venom flashing. "Ungrateful girl," she hissed. "I knew from the start you weren't strong enough for my son. You played the perfect wife until the crack showed. And now you're scrambling like a rat off a sinking ship." Grace stepped closer, fury burning in her face. "Enough. You have no right to speak to my daughter like that. She gave 7 years of her life to your son, and this is the thanks she gets? No more. You don't get to belittle her while we're here." The standoff thickened the air. Every second stretched taut like a wire about to snap. Emma's soft voice broke in, soothing Ethan, who clung tighter to her arm. The boy's frightened eyes darted between the adults, sensing the storm, even if he didn't understand it. Elaine straightened, drawing herself taller, her chin lifting with disdain. "If Ryan were here, He'd never let this circus happen. You're poisoning her against him, filling her head with lies. Maya shook her head, her voice firm but quiet. Ryan doesn't need anyone's help to ruin what we had. He did that all on his own. The finality in her words seemed to slice through the room. Elaine faltered, her expression stiffening, though she quickly masked it with more anger. But before she could lash out again, Alex stepped forward, a key dangling from his hand. "This," he said, holding it up, "is the last set. Once we leave, Maya won't need it anymore. So here." He placed it firmly on the counter between them. "Consider that your proof we're not hiding anything. She's done here." The gesture was small, but it carried the weight of finality. The Carter family gathered the last of the boxes, their movements deliberate, unified. Elaine stood rigid, her eyes blazing with fury, but she made no move to stop them. As Maya walked out of the apartment, the echo of the door shutting behind her felt like a closing chapter. She clutched the box in her arms tightly, her chest heavy but her step steady. The confrontation had left her shaken, but also strangely lighter. The key was gone, the tether was cut. Whatever lay ahead, at least this part of her life was finished. The Carter family home in Chicago was warm and welcoming, a stark contrast to the hollow apartment Maya had just left behind. Grace insisted she stay as long as she needed, setting up a spare room with fresh sheets, while Emma cooked meals that filled the house with comforting aromas. Alex hovered close, protective, as though guarding her from any further blows life might throw. Even little Ethan sensed something was different. He would toddle into her room in the mornings, his toy trucks clutched in small hands, offering them silently as if sharing his treasures might ease her pain. For a few days, Maya allowed herself to rest. She ate dinner at her parents' table, listened to Emma's gentle chatter, and sat quietly in the living room while Alex flipped through channels on the television. The simple rhythm of family life wrapped around her like a balm. Yet beneath the comfort, a gnawing unease remained. Each night, lying awake in the unfamiliar bed, she whispered the same thought to herself. "I can't stay here forever." It wasn't pride that stirred the feeling, but a deep fear of becoming a burden. Grace already carried enough on her shoulders, and though her mother would never say so, Maya couldn't shake the image of intruding on the delicate balance of the household. She wanted to stand on her own 2 feet again, to breathe without leaning on everyone else's strength. One evening, as the family gathered in the kitchen after dinner, Emma poured her a cup of tea and studied her carefully. "You've been so quiet," she said softly. "I know you're still hurting, but maybe a change of scenery would help. Sometimes when you're surrounded by the same walls, the pain just echoes louder." Maya looked at her sister-in-law, surprised by the gentle suggestion. She wrapped her hands around the warm mug, considering. The words tugged at something in her memory, and then she remembered, a house in Wisconsin. Her late aunt had left it to her, a modest property near a small town. She hadn't thought of it in years. The house had been locked up, visited only occasionally by a local caretaker. At the time it had felt like an afterthought, not part of her life in Chicago with Ryan. But now the memory of that quiet place surfaced like a lifeline. "There's the house in Wisconsin," Maya said slowly, almost testing the idea aloud. "The one Aunt Margaret left me. I've never really stayed there. Maybe that's where I should go just for a while to get my head straight." Grace's eyes filled with concern. "Are you sure, honey? It's a long way from here. That place hasn't been lived in for years." "I know," Maya admitted, "but it's mine. And right now, I think I need to be somewhere that belongs only to me." The room fell quiet, the weight of her words settling over them. Finally Alex nodded, his expression serious. "If that's what you want, we'll make it happen. I can drive you there, or better yet, we'll hire a car service so you don't have to worry." But Maya shook her head gently. "I don't want anyone spending more money on me. I'll take the bus. It'll be cheaper, and I think I need the time alone to sit with it, to process." Alex frowned, clearly ready to argue, but Emma touched his arm, silently urging him to let it be. Grace reached across the table and squeezed Maya's hand. "If this is what your heart tells you, then go. Just promise me you'll call every day until you're settled. I need to know you're safe." Maya's throat tightened as she nodded. She looked around the table at her mother's lined face, at Alex's worried frown, at Emma's quiet support, and at Ethan, who was already yawning in his chair, oblivious to the adult conversation. A wave of gratitude washed over her. For the first time since Ryan's confession, she felt like she had a direction, however uncertain. She wasn't walking into a future defined by betrayal anymore. She was choosing a path that belonged to her alone. The following morning, Maya stood at the Chicago bus terminal with a single suitcase by her side. The air smelled of exhaust and coffee, the murmur of travelers weaving around her. Announcements crackled overhead, calling out destinations across the Midwest. She clutched her ticket tightly, the print smudging beneath her damp palms. The destination read Greenfield, Wisconsin. It wasn't much more than a dot on the map, but it was where the house waited, the one place that still bore her name alone. The coach bus rumbled to life as she climbed aboard, finding a seat by the window. The vinyl upholstery was worn, the air stale, but she hardly noticed. Outside, Chicago's skyline receded, glass and steel giving way to the flat sprawl of suburbs, then open farmland stretching endlessly under the sky. The hours passed slowly. Fields rolled by, rows of corn fading into patches of woods, barns weathered by decades of wind. The monotony should have lulled her into numbness, but her body remained taut, her thoughts too restless. She replayed Ryan's words, the venom of Elaine's insults, the ache in her mother's eyes. Each memory pressed against her chest, but she clung to the rhythm of the road, letting the miles pull her further away. At midday, the bus pulled into a roadside station. The fluorescent lights buzzed above racks of chips and candy, the smell of fried food lingering in the air. Maya stretched her stiff legs and bought a bottle of water and a pack of crackers, forcing herself to eat even though her stomach resisted. She sat alone at a plastic table, her suitcase at her feet, watching families chatter and travelers scroll through their phones. To them it was just another stop. For her it was a pause between two lives. Back on the bus, fatigue settled into her bones. She leaned against the cool glass of the window, drifting in and out of uneasy sleep. By the time the driver announced their arrival in Greenfield, the sun was dipping low, painting the horizon in shades of orange and pink. The town was small, almost startlingly so after the endless sprawl of Chicago. The bus station was little more than a concrete platform beside a brick building that doubled as a convenience store. She stepped off with her suitcase, the evening air crisp against her skin. There were no taxis waiting, no line of cars, just a quiet stretch of road leading toward the edge of town. Maya tightened her grip on the suitcase handle and began to walk. The road wound past modest houses with wide porches, then narrowed into a path bordered by fields. The silence was broken only by the chirp of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves. With every step her shoes scuffed gravel, the weight of her belongings dragging behind her. Her muscles ached, but she pushed forward. The scenery shifted as she neared the property. Tall pines lined the path, their branches knitting together overhead, casting long shadows that seemed to swallow the light. A chill prickled her skin despite the warm air. She remembered visiting this place once as a child, her aunt's laughter, the smell of wood smoke. But that memory felt like it belonged to another lifetime. When the house finally came into view, her heart sank. The once white siding was stained gray, streaked with years of neglect. Several shutters hung loose, banging softly in the breeze. The porch sagged under its own weight, boards warped and splintered. Weeds had swallowed the front yard, curling around broken steps. A cracked window reflected the last light of day, jagged like a wound. Maya's throat tightened as she climbed the porch, her suitcase bumping against the stairs. The door groaned as she pushed it open. Inside, the smell hit her first: dust, damp wood, and something sour that made her stomach turn. The living room was a wasteland. Furniture was overturned, cushions slashed open, stuffing spilling like entrails. The floor was littered with broken glass, empty cans, and crumpled papers. Cobwebs stretched across corners, and the wallpaper peeled in ragged strips. The kitchen was worse. Grease stains on the counters, dishes left to rot, the sink clogged with filth. She covered her mouth with her sleeve, her eyes stinging. This was no homecoming. This was desecration. For a moment, the weight of it threatened to crush her. She thought of turning back, of finding the next bus out of town, and retreating to the safety of her mother's kitchen. But then she steadied herself, gripping the back of a broken chair until her knuckles whitened. "This is mine," she thought fiercely, "and I won't let anyone take it from me." Her exhaustion was heavy, but beneath it burned a stubborn flame. The house might have been ruined, but it still belonged to her. Piece by piece, she would strip away the filth, sweep out the shadows, and reclaim it. As the sun vanished and darkness filled the broken rooms, Maya set her suitcase in the corner. She pulled out a blanket, spread it across the least damaged patch of floor and sat down, her back against the wall. The silence pressed in, but instead of fear, she felt resolve. It wasn't comfort, not yet, but it was a beginning. The next morning, sunlight seeped weakly through the grime-streaked windows. Dust floated in golden shafts, revealing just how much neglect the house had endured. Maya had barely slept on the thin blanket she spread across the floor, her body aching from the hard surface, but determination drove her to her feet. She tied her hair back, rolled up her sleeves, and began the grim task of reclaiming the house one corner at a time. Armed with a broom she found propped against the back porch, she swept layers of dust and broken glass into piles. Every scrape of bristles across the warped floorboards echoed in the stillness, reminding her how alone she was. She moved methodically through the rooms, opening cabinets, discarding trash, trying to breathe through the sharp scent of mold and decay. In the bedroom, she tugged open a dresser drawer swollen with dampness. Papers were stuffed haphazardly inside. Old receipts, yellowed letters, scraps of handwriting. As she sifted through them, one folded sheet caught her attention. The paper was torn along the edges, the ink faded but legible. Her eyes scanned the words and a chill swept through her. My name is Margaret Hall. If anyone finds this note, please know I am being held against my will. Victor Hall, who claims to be my relative, is not who he says he is. He is dangerous. He and his people deal in property scams, and they will not let me go. If I disappear, know that he is responsible. Please help me. Maya's breath hitched. Her hands trembled as she held the fragile paper, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it might echo through the room. This wasn't just neglect. The house wasn't simply abandoned. There was a story here, one filled with danger and deceit. She folded the note quickly, slipping it into her pocket. Panic clawed at her chest, but instinct told her she couldn't leave it in plain sight. Whoever Margaret was, her words painted Victor as a predator, a liar who had wormed his way into the property under false pretenses, and Maya had already met him, charming, insistent, far too interested in her arrival. A sudden knock at the front door made her flinch. The sound reverberated through the empty house, sharp and demanding. She froze, her hand instinctively covering the pocket where the note was hidden. Maya! A man's voice called cheerfully. It's Victor. I brought you something to eat. Thought you could use a little help settling in. Her pulse spiked. She forced her features into calm, hurrying to the bathroom mirror. She splashed water on her face, smoothing away any trace of panic. When she opened the door, Victor stood there with a paper bag in his hands, smiling as though he were an old friend. Morning, he said warmly. I figured you might not have had time to get groceries yet, so I picked up some things. Sandwiches, coffee, even a slice of pie from the diner. Maya summoned a smile, thin and careful. That's thoughtful of you. Thank you. Victor stepped inside without waiting for permission, setting the bag on the dusty kitchen counter. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the progress she had made. You're really working hard already. This place will shine again with a little elbow grease. Maya kept her tone light, masking the chill in her veins. That's the plan, though I don't eat meat. So sandwiches might be wasted on me. Vegetarian, huh? Victor chuckled, shaking his head. Should have guessed. You've got that clean living look. She laughed softly, though her stomach churned. Something like that. He leaned against the counter, watching her too closely. You know, it must be overwhelming coming here on your own. These old houses can swallow you whole, but you're lucky you've got me nearby. I know this place, its quirks, its history. Maya forced herself to keep eye contact, tilting her head as though interested. History, huh? Maybe you'll share some of it with me sometime. The words tasted bitter, but she knew she had to play along. If Margaret's note was true, this man was dangerous. She couldn't afford to let him sense her fear. Victor grinned, pleased by her response. Of course, maybe tonight, after you've settled in a little more. I'll bring something lighter to eat. Salad, maybe. We can talk. Every instinct screamed to send him away, to slam the door and call for help. But Maya's voice came out calm, almost friendly. That sounds nice. Thank you again for thinking of me. He studied her for a moment longer, his smile never faltering, though his eyes held a flicker of calculation. Then he picked up his empty hands, nodded, and stepped back toward the door. I'll see you soon, Maya. Don't work too hard. The door closed and silence rushed back in. Maya sagged against the wall, her hand diving into her pocket to feel the folded note. Her body shook, not from exhaustion, but from terror she could no longer deny. She knew now that she wasn't just cleaning an old house. She was standing in the middle of someone else's nightmare. And for the first time she understood how precarious her situation truly was. The moment the door shut behind Victor, Maya pressed her back against it, her breath coming in shallow bursts. Her hand trembled as she pulled the folded note from her pocket, reading the lines again to be sure she hadn't imagined them. The plea was unmistakable. Margaret Hall was being held somewhere against her will, and Victor was behind it. The man who had just stood in her kitchen, smiling like a neighbor, was the same one Margaret had named as dangerous. Her phone felt like a lifeline in her hand. With careful fingers she unfolded the note on the counter, snapped 2 photos, and typed a brief message to Alex. Found this in the house. I think something terrible happened. Please help me. She hesitated only a second before pressing send. The reply came quickly. Stay calm. Don't confront him. I'll call the sheriff's office. I've got an old friend in the department. We'll handle it. Keep your phone close. Relief and dread tangled in her chest. Help was coming, but she had no idea how long it would take. Hours, a full day. She couldn't risk being caught off guard. As evening descended, shadows crept through the broken windows, turning the house into a maze of dark corners. Maya gathered what she could find: a length of rope from the porch, an old skillet from the filthy kitchen, a stack of tin pans rusting in the cupboard. With deliberate care, she rigged them into makeshift alarms. She tied the rope to the back door so any forced entry would rattle a chain of pans. At the front door she wedged the skillet against a knob, a crude brace that would clang loudly if moved. She moved through the house with quick, nervous steps, checking every window latch, every possible point of entry. Her hands were clammy, her stomach twisting, but she forced herself to continue. It was the only thing she could control. By nightfall, exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. She sat on the floor with her back against the wall, the glow of her phone screen her only comfort. Each buzz made her heart lurch. Finally, a message from Alex appeared. On our way. Keep lights off. I'll signal when safe. The words steadied her, but only just. She set the phone in her lap, straining to listen. Outside, the Wisconsin night was eerily quiet, broken only by the occasional chirp of crickets. The silence pressed against her, thick with threat. Then came it, a faint shuffle near the front porch. Her body went rigid. She held her breath, her eyes locked on the door. A second sound followed, like weight shifting against old wood. The skillet rattled faintly, not enough to fall, but enough to confirm someone was there. Maya's pulse thundered in her ears. She clutched her phone, her thumb hovering over the emergency call button. The air inside the house felt stifling, every creak of the floorboards magnified by her fear. A sudden thump jolted her, a hand pressing against the door, testing its strength. The skillet clanged once, the sound slicing through the silence. Maya's heart slammed against her ribs. Then mercifully her phone buzzed. A single message from Alex lit the screen. It's us. Don't move. Stay inside. She exhaled shakily, her knees nearly giving out from the flood of relief. Moments later, muffled voices and the crunch of boots sounded outside. Flashlight beams sliced through the cracks in the blinds. The next seconds blurred. A knock shook the door, followed by a firm voice. Sheriff's Department, Maya, you're safe. Open slowly. Hands trembling, she unlatched the door. Alex stood there with 2 uniformed officers beside him, their flashlights cutting across the yard. The sight of her brother's familiar face nearly undid her. Behind them, deputies moved quickly toward a truck parked at the edge of the property. Shouts erupted, heavy boots pounding, followed by the crackle of a radio. Within moments, Victor was dragged from the shadows, his arms pinned, his protests loud but futile. The mask of neighborly kindness was gone. His voice was sharp, venomous, filled with curses. Where is she? One of the deputies demanded. Victor spat back denial, but it didn't matter. A second team emerged from the woods minutes later, guiding a frail woman wrapped in a blanket. Her gray hair was matted, her steps unsteady, but her eyes glistened with relief. "Mrs. Margaret Hall," Alex whispered, recognition flickering in his expression. The woman clung to the deputy's arm, her voice soft but clear. "Thank you. Thank you for finding me." Maya's throat tightened as she watched. The note had been real. Margaret had been close by, hidden, waiting for someone to hear her silent plea. Victor was shoved into the back of a patrol car, still shouting, his voice muffled as the door slammed shut. The flashing lights painted the night in red and blue, a surreal glow that made the old house look even more haunted. Alex turned to Maya, pulling her into a fierce embrace. "You're safe now," he said, his voice rough. "It's over." But Maya knew it wasn't over. Not entirely. The scars of the last days would take time to fade. Still standing there in the cool night air, surrounded by family and the authority of the law, she felt something she hadn't in weeks. She felt the first stirrings of safety. A week after the arrest in Wisconsin, Maya was back in Chicago. The city felt different now, its noise and movement no longer suffocating, but strangely grounding. She had signed a lease for a small apartment not far from her parents' home. The place wasn't much, one bedroom, a modest kitchen, a balcony that overlooked a row of maple trees, but it was hers. For the first time in months she could shut a door behind her and know no one else held a claim to the space. Unpacking was a quiet ritual. She set her books on a single shelf, hung her clothes in the narrow closet, and placed a framed photo of her family on the nightstand. There were no traces of Ryan here. No reminders of promises broken. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and new beginnings. At night she slept more soundly than she had in years, the silence of the apartment gentle rather than oppressive. But one final step remained, the courtroom. On a gray morning, Maya dressed in a simple navy dress and walked into the courthouse, her heels clicking softly against the marble floors. The corridors hummed with low conversations, lawyers shuffling papers, clerks calling out case numbers. She found the room listed on her summons and pushed the heavy door open. Inside, Ryan sat at the table with his attorney. His posture was casual, almost smug, as though convinced the outcome was already written in his favor. Beside him, Elaine hovered protectively, her disapproval radiating across the aisle. Madison sat quietly a few rows back, her rounded belly a visible reminder of the life that had replaced Maya in Ryan's world. Maya took her seat without a word, her attorney nodding at her reassuringly. She didn't look at Ryan directly. There was nothing left to see. The proceedings were brief, matter of fact. The judge reviewed the documents, the division of property, the dissolution of marriage. Ryan's lawyer spoke with measured confidence, but Maya barely heard the words. The language of the court was cold, precise, but it carried no sting for her. This was not a battle. It was a formality, a stamp of closure on a chapter already ended. When the judge finally declared the marriage dissolved, Ryan leaned back in his chair, his mouth tightening, perhaps expecting some reaction from her. But Maya only nodded once, her face calm, her heartbeat steady. She felt no need for anger, no urge for tears. The wound had already scarred. As the room emptied, Elaine muttered something under her breath, a sharp glance aimed at Maya, but it slid off her like rain on glass. Madison shifted uncomfortably, her hand resting on her stomach, her eyes never quite meeting Maya's. Ryan gathered his papers, his expression souring when he realized she would not give him the satisfaction of a scene. Maya stood, smoothed her dress, and walked toward the exit. Outside the courthouse, the air was crisp, the sky overcast but brightening at the edges. She paused at the top of the stone steps, breathing deeply. For the first time, she felt the weight slide off her shoulders completely. The betrayal had nearly broken her, but it had also delivered her to this moment, where she was free, where her future belonged only to her. She thought of Eleanor's warning, of Margaret's desperate note, of her mother's embrace, of Alex's fierce protection. Each piece of the journey had carved her into someone stronger, someone unwilling to live in the shadow of someone else's choices. Maya stepped down the courthouse stairs, her movements unhurried, her head held high. The city stretched out before her, bustling and indifferent, but she no longer felt lost within it. She was moving forward, not backward. There would still be nights of loneliness, still echoes of the life she had imagined with Ryan. But those echoes no longer held power. They were only reminders of where she had been, not where she was going. At the base of the steps, she paused and lifted her face toward the pale sun breaking through the clouds. The light was faint but steady, a promise of warmth returning after a long winter. And with that, Maya Carter walked into the next chapter of her life. Not with bitterness, not with regret, but with the quiet strength she had earned through fire. The door behind her had closed. Ahead, everything was hers to claim.